Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Report. Today we're talking about what every broker must know about entitlements and zoning. We got a very special guest joining us. I'll introduce him in just a moment. My name is Chris Berg, host of the show. I'm head of business development for Abernathy Holdings. We build Class A self-storage sites in California and Arizona. Our guest today, managing partner at Earl and Curley Zoning and Land Use Law, Taylor Earl. Taylor, it's great to have you with us. I know you've done some work with us in Arizona, so I'm excited to hear a bit more about that. But let's just start with your background. And I think what I really want to know is how'd you end up in this area of law?
Yeah, well, hey, it's great to be on. Thank you, Chris, for having me. Yeah, we've done work with your group and more than happy to chat today. And hopefully we've done some good work and you see us as an expert. So that's positive, right? I ended up in this field in a way that is a little atypical. My dad is the Earl in our letterhead there. And he started this practice back in 1991. As a kid, we'd drive down the street and he would say, well, I worked on that project and I worked on that project. And I remember that was always really fun, but man, he used to have these night hearings and I thought, I don't know if that's for me. And I thought, well, I'll go to law school, but I don't know if I want to do zoning law, Dad. And I don't know, and then it became pretty apparent about 3 or 4 years into my practice of law generally that I thought, I think I'm probably genetically engineered to do what Dad does. And so we had a conversation and he said, if you're going to come over, now's the time. I joined the firm and we were able to practice together for several years before I ultimately took over the firm. So that's kind of a windy road to how I ended up in doing zoning and land use.
Good for you. I, again, appreciate the time. And for those of you that are joining us, if you've got any questions or comments along the way, please just put them in the comment section. We'll be happy to get to those for you. Unfortunately, Taylor's put together a great presentation here. So Taylor, I'm going to let you lead the way and I'll just be the ombudsman. If there's anyone, if you don't mind me jumping in, maybe asking some questions here and there, that'd be great. Okay.
That's great. So the nature of the presentation that I wanted to give is as you meet brokers, as you meet with clients, you need to help them navigate those early stages so that you can help them know, is this a good avenue to go down or is it not? As brokers, you need to get deals to the finish line. Otherwise, you're spinning your wheels, you're not making money. So it's important for you to get data points that are valuable and accurate upfront. And so you need to know a little bit about a lot of different fields to vet, is this a good deal? Is it not a good deal? And so what I wanted to present to you are some things that you should generally know about my area of discipline, which is zoning and land use, so that you can vet deals quickly and move them forward or tell the client, not a good deal, let's move on. And so to that end, the first thing you should do when you get into this sort of field is know who to talk to, right? So I want to present you with tools that'll help you answer some of your own questions, but then also you need to find a good zoning and land use practice. If it's Arizona, boy, we hope it's us, but it doesn't have to be. You just need to find somebody that you trust, that you've got on your speed dial, that you can call, you can email and say, hey, I got a quick question. I just need to understand this. Help me vet this. So that's going to be really important to have in your corner. Now, as we get into actual tools, let's talk about some things. And again, what I'm about to share with you is going to be Arizona and in some ways Phoenix centric because it's the biggest municipality here. But what I'm going to talk about is applicable broadly as well. So maybe the tools look a little different, but it's the same general concept. So the first place that you'll want to look is you pull up the parcel map. So this is Maricopa County's parcel map. And it's kind of the go-to. It's like, how did we even work on deals before we had these parcel maps where you could go and check in on where the boundary is and you're seeing a clear aerial and all of that. Now, what I tell people is this is a great place to start, but do not end here. And the reason for that is that in this particular one and on others, they will apparently list for you the zoning. So you look at this and you look in the left, it tells you what jurisdiction is, it tells you who owns it, and it tells you the zoning. And you think, great, I know what the zoning is on this property, I can move on. Except it does sometimes. So what I mean by that is that you should not trust the county to tell you something that it isn't over. So it's not over the zoning district. If you have a specific map from that jurisdiction, you can have a lot more confidence. For example, if this parcel has split zoning, let's say this parcel has R4 and R16, R4 being a multifamily designation, R16 being a single family designation, it would not show you that. It would be one parcel, it would give you one designation. But it's possible for a parcel to have two zoning districts, and it may be split right down the middle. So that's one thing that you're not going to pick up on a parcel map generally, at least not the parcel maps that I'm familiar with. So it's a good place to start, but not the place to finish. Now, there's going to be other zoning specific maps that you can use. So in the case of that last one, okay, I know it's in Phoenix, so let me go to the Phoenix specific zoning map. And so Phoenix has one of the, I would say, the best one that I've seen so far. They've obviously invested a good amount of money in making a very robust database. But other jurisdictions will have maps as well. So in this particular map, it gives you different layers you can turn on and off. And so in this case, I have the zoning that's clicked. And so I can click on things and it'll show me the zoning. And so if you're going to really try to find out what the zoning is, go past the parcel map, dive into the jurisdictional specific zoning map. Now it could look like this, and this is a little bit more common, where it'll be a sort of pre-printed, not one that has different layers, not one that you can select, but one that's sort of a pre-printed PDF where maybe you're zooming in on different sections. And of course, the challenge with these is that it's a little hard to line up exactly where the zoning line ends, and you sort of assume that C2 matches the parcel line, but it may not. So it's another level of specificity, but it too isn't exactly perfect. But that's the place you'd want to go, and you'd want to understand, okay, the C2, and then let me move on from there.
Can I just get now, because I think you brought up a great point about who, not how. Like, figure out who do you need to know that's going to have the answers, especially as a broker, because your time is so valuable. Who are some of maybe the top people I should be focused on trying to get to know within is it a city planning commission or?
Yeah, so that's going to be, so with outside of a jurisdiction, outside of a municipality, sort of non-governmental, it's going to be your consultants, right? It's going to be your team of consultants. And that we're going to be specific to a certain area. So it's zoning and land use consultants or planning firms if you're outside. Sometimes you can find a good friend within a planning department. So somebody you know that you can call and say, hey, I've got this property. I just want to check on the zoning. Most jurisdictions are going to have some type of planner of the day type phone number you can call. And so that's a decent place to go. And you just have to be aware that planner is seeing this property for the first time and they're not researching it, right? They're picking it up, they're looking at their database and they're moving on. And so take it for what it is, which is a planner giving you free time to look at a property, but they may or may not be really diving into it, knowing the nuances. And in some instances, and although not all, they may be using a staff member, a junior staffer that's kind of new to the planning world. They've been in it a couple of years. So maybe there's some nuances you pick up after a long time in the industry. Oh, you know what? Let me check this one more thing, because sometimes these things happen in this particular area. So you just kind of take what you get. Again, they're all data points, but you just want to be careful that you're not saying, hey, the definitive truth, I spoke with John on the phone and he gave me the chapter and verse of this, and we can take that all the way to the bank, right? You take it for what it is. You say, thank you, John, for giving me the time on the phone today. I'm going to do a little bit more research to run that to ground. So I think there are both inside and outside of municipality. There's people that you can call and start to get the data points as you wind towards being hyper accurate.
But thank you for saying that, because as I'm calling about self-storage zoning here in California, like I'll call up a city and, as you just mentioned, talk to two different people and sometimes get two different answers. So that's where you and your firm step in and, hey, look, this is our job to go make sure we've got accurate information. Is that fair to say?
I think that's right. Yeah. And I think it's important, and maybe some of these initial slides are showing that we can sometimes want really valuable answers, but we want them on a Google search, right? We want it quick, but we want it hyper accurate. And sometimes those don't, because there is more complexity in the zoning. And you could say, hey, look, 7 times out of 10, if I just look at the map and it tells me the story and I can move forward. But there are complexities and there are little things that can catch you. And so you have to be careful that you can maybe start with those initial data points, but before you go to the bank, make sure those have been verified. And so what our firm does is we have experience knowing what things to look for, what questions to ask, and then ultimately we can help pursue either zoning verification letter from a municipality or other clarity So I just had a client calling me and they're like, look, we're finishing due diligence. We need to run some things to ground. And so we were able to issue spot for them and, say, hey, these are some things we would need to run to ground. They're like, well, we don't have time to run it to ground now, but that helps us know some things to be aware of. And so I think we gave them a lot of things to think about, maybe raise some questions, but at least they went in with eyes wide open as they sort of finished their due diligence period, knowing, okay, here's what I know I need to look at, and here's some potential risks, and here's the likelihood of that risk becoming a problem. And if they had been able to give us more time, we could have run those things to ground a little bit more. But sometimes the time isn't there. You just have to move forward with the best data you have available at the time.
Taylor, thank you. I want to remind you just joining us. Thank you for joining us. If you got any questions or comments for Taylor, just put them in your comment section, and we'll be more than happy to answer them. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, Taylor, but keep going. And like I said, I'll be the ombudsman. Okay.
That's fantastic. So one of the other things that zoning isn't necessarily going to give you, and I'll talk about it in kind of two parts here, is zoning stipulations. So you may have a situation where you have the zoning and I've got C2, I really want to go do this retail development, or I've got I1, I want to be able to put this industrial development on it. Except that what isn't apparent on any of those maps is that you have a stipulated site plan. So here's a situation where we had a stipulated site plan on a site that otherwise had good zoning, but unless I built according to that site plan, I couldn't use the zoning. And so it's a big gotcha if you're not careful. And so not only do you need to know what the zoning category is, the district, you need to know what stipulations may exist, because they may eat into your development in a way that makes it undevelopable. So if I had this proposed site plan, this is what I want to do. Now, a lot of times it'll be, the stipulation may be worded to say, you have the industrial zoning in conformance with the site plan, or in general conformance to this site plan, or specific conformance. So there's other ways, there's other language that's used. So you may have to come back and do what in Phoenix they call PHO, but is broadly understood, it's just a stipulation modification, where you need to modify the stipulations, which then has to go back to the council. The council is the one who issued the decision with the stipulations. If you're going to change one of those stipulations, you need to go back to council. And so it can be, it's a public hearing process. So you need to be careful that you may have the zoning district you want, but you may not have the stipulations you want. So it's another sort of thing as you do this quick research, just to be aware of. It can be lingering or sort of lurking behind the scenes. Now, once you know what zoning you have, the other thing you want to do is go check, well, is my use permitted, right? That's the sort of next thing, right? Client wants to do this use. Is that permitted in this district? And so these tables are every zoning ordinance, right? They're all a little bit different. And this is one that is not uncommon. It's to have a sort of table where the use is on the left, and it's saying, okay, here's the use, and then it goes across the different zoning districts, and it's telling you, is it permitted or not? In this particular chart, you're seeing two designations. One is CUP, which can stand for council use permit, which is the case here, or it can be a conditional use permit. And then P would be permitted. And so you can look through and go, okay, blank space means not permitted. And so you go through and you're sort of lining up with your district and the use that you want. Now, where it gets interesting. Oh, Chris, go ahead. Yeah, please.
So quickly, for everybody, can you give the distinction between by right versus a CUP?
Yeah, good. So if I've got something that's permitted, that's it, I'm done. From a zoning side, I'm good to go, right? Except for that stipulation thing I just mentioned, right? Which can prohibit the use indirectly, right? They could say, well, you could do that use. It just has to match this site plan. And you'd say, nobody can do this use in that site plan. It's not built for it. Well, okay, well, technically you're allowed to do the use. You just can't do it in that site plan. So you need to come through. So setting that aside for just a second, from just a sheer use perspective, if I get it by right here, for example, I'm looking at one down here saying, okay, I'm P and C1, right? Animal clinic. Let's line that over and go, okay, in C1, I can do an animal clinic. Okay, great. But then the question may come up, okay, well, I don't know if we would call our use a clinic. We do have some medical uses. It's a doggy daycare, but we also do take care of the animals. if something's going wrong with them. And so, it's maybe somewhere in between. It's not a boarding facility, but it's also not a full clinic. So where do we fall? And that becomes then an interpretation where no jurisdiction can tell you every possible version of every possible use. No list could be that long. And so they put in categories, and then you have to go seek an interpretation to determine whether or not you're permitted. So let's say in this instance, I say, okay, it's not permitted. I either need to rezone or I need a CUP. So your question was, what about by right? What about CUPs? So CUP, different jurisdictions do it differently. But in this, I can tell you in this jurisdiction, that's a council action. So I would need to process, it's not a rezoning case, but it's effectively a public hearing process, which looks and smells a lot like a rezoning case. The difference is I can say to the public, hey, we were already permitted. We already have C1. It's already expected to be commercial. It's just that when we go to this particular use, the drafters of the ordinance wanted us to come back and let the council take a second look. We may say, hey, generally speaking, we're probably going to be okay with certain uses in these districts, but we want to take a second look at it because it may be that, if we look up here at this chart, for example, this airport, man, in some I1s, it's a no-brainer. Who cares? In some I1s, it may be a terrible use next to neighbors, next to other uses. And so it's looking at the specifics of that use in that location so that we can say, I don't want to give blanket, anybody in I1 can have an airport because that comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes. Let's make them come back and look at that. In some jurisdictions, it's a hearing officer through a use permit, like in Phoenix. In some cases, it's going to be a council action.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, okay, so we figured out the uses. Some other things to be aware of is that you may say, hey, I've got I1, I'm golden, except that you're in an overlay. So you can have zoning and then you can have an overlay on top of that. And the overlay can control things that are underneath it in the underlying zoning. So you have to be careful that you're not in an overlay zone that's gonna control the zoning. And this particular one, Mesa did something really interesting. They called it their tech corridor, which was kind of an interesting overlay area where you can achieve faster rezoning if you're willing to rezone to certain specifications. If you're willing to adopt this set of rules and regulations, they'll run you through zoning. So when we talk about how does the government stimulate economic development, tell a developer he doesn't need to spend 8 months in zoning and that you'll fast track his zoning. They may be willing to adopt the type of regulations you're looking for. So it's actually a really creative thing that Mesa did to help stimulate development of a certain type and model in a particular area. But broadly, overlays, you just need to be careful about those because those can lurk and they can control the zoning that you'd otherwise be allowed to do. All right, let's talk about what's a PUD or a PAD. Most places are going to have some version of this, and how much, and they're all a little different, but broadly speaking, you can think of a PUD or PAD as tailor-made zoning, right? It's tailored to a specific site, whether the development standards are tailored, the use list is tailored, or sometimes they're both tailored. So I'll give you sort of a classic example. So our office represents GCU. They're a really great university here in the Valley. They have had an explosion of growth. They have an online presence, but they also have a campus presence here in Phoenix, in Phoenix particular, and then sort of on the west side of Phoenix. And you can see here some of that campus as it's grown. And those who are in the area know, wow, yeah, GCU, that thing's growing like crazy. Well, what zoning district would you give a college campus? Just keep in mind, you have offices, you have classrooms, you have restaurants, you have small businesses, you have residential, you have football fields, you have entertainment venues, right? None of that seems to fit in any one category. And when we start to get internal to campus, why would you regulate the setback between this building and that building when it's not a neighbor, it's not an adjacent owner, it's me? And so, maybe some of those setbacks can be modified to take into account this unique environment. And so a PUD has allowed us with GCU to have a zoning district that is specific to the uses that are needed, and specific to the development standards that are needed. And as we've gone through over time, we've been able to tweak that. Hey, this hasn't quite worked. Let's modify that. And the city has been a great partner in helping us come up with a very valuable PUD for GCU. Valuable in the sense that it allows it puts the framework in place to both protect the neighbors as we get to the perimeters. It makes sure that there's quality development that protects the city and frankly, our own students and faculty. And it makes sure that we have the operational latitude to build a great campus. And that has resulted in being ranked number 19 on the best college campuses in America. Right? It is a great accomplishment, but it's evidenced by the zoning that we're now running around in shackles all the time, trying to develop something great and beginning these archaic rules that were put in place to process much different environments. Now, that's a classic case of a PUD where it absolutely makes sense to have something tailored. But you can have another case that we processed that was an apartment complex. Well, why would an apartment complex need to have that type of flexibility? Well, because it did a couple of things. It was a unique site, and it was an infill redevelopment, and you can kind of see it here in the center of the screen. But what it did for the community is that we were regulated to look a certain way. So we said, look, in exchange for some reductions on some setbacks, in exchange for some latitude here, we will give you a high quality, high aesthetic development that will be baked into the zoning. So when the zoning comes out, we're not talking about some stipulations that may be added maybe later and they're going to be a little broad instrument. It is hyper specific. We've written you a narrative. We've put in exhibits. This is what we're going to be bound to. But in exchange, we get some flexibility over here. So there's sort of a give and take that can happen with these, that the jurisdiction ends up with this high quality product, and we're able to get some flexibility in the places that make sense for us. So you're maximizing value, right? Looks like your slides got a little messed here. So what it can also do is, in some jurisdictions, they allow you to use a PUD to restrict land uses. So normally you are not allowed to use. So for example, if I have C1 and I say, yeah, C1 allows for gas stations. Maybe I'm saying I don't want to do a gas station. I just want a small little market. And so I go to the hearing and someone says, boy, Mr. Earl, in this environment, gas station would not be good up against these homes. And I say, oh, don't worry, we're not doing a gas station. And they say, but could you? And I'd say, well, I'm happy to accept a stipulation that I can't do a gas station. And if they have a lawyer that knows the rules, they'd say, that's an illegal stipulation. We can't stipulate to that. You can't restrict uses. I can put in setbacks, I can put in trees, I can do other things, but I can't restrict uses. So by doing, and it's not true of every jurisdiction, but a lot of them will allow you through their PAD or PUD instrument to restrict uses. So we call this sort of the unintended baggage. I'm coming in to do a little market, and with me comes all the other C1 uses that I have no intention of ever doing. But if I use an instrument like this, like a PUD or a PAD, then it allows me to pull those uses off. And I can say, I'm not going to do it because it's not going to be allowed within my zoning. So we've done one where we went into an environment where we were surrounded kind of by homes. And we said, the only thing we want to do is self-storage. And so we got permission from the jurisdiction to process PUD, PAD that only allowed self-storage. It was the only commercial use allowed within the zoning. So the neighbors knew exactly what they were going to get. And we didn't care because that's the only thing we wanted to do. We weren't looking to maximize value on the land and to bring up 50 commercial uses. We might flex and do something different. It was hyper specific. We want to do this one use. And frankly, if this use doesn't work, then it's going to have to be rezoned. But it put a lot of protection on the neighborhood. And so it can work in very specific environments like this where you're surrounded by homes.
So can we back up? So what was your process for that? And did part of that get greenlit because you had a prior relationship, or?
You mean with the jurisdiction or?
As far as saying, hey, we're just going to use this just for self-storage. Like, that is music to my ears, obviously, and it's very rare to have that happen in California. So was that something you went to the city and said, hey guys, we want to create this PUD for self-storage, and you think you got it because of a prior relationship, or they just say, hey, this was a great maximum use of this piece of dirt?
Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly the relationships that we have, they are relationships we've built on trust, right? So I didn't get any sort of special favor per se of like, well, we would never not allow this, but we know Taylor. But I was able to have a sit down with the director because I've built trust over time, right? They know that I speak, that I'm going to say it like it is. And they know that, and because they know me, I'm able to, it helps me get that meeting, right? But I got to make my case. I got to sit down and say, this is why we think it makes sense. Here's the environment. If I come in, this land hasn't been processed and then nobody's done development on it. There's been some false starts on it. So we've got a land that's not going forward. And one of the challenges is that it's surrounded by residential. Now, self-storage, that's innocuous, right? That's quiet. That's a great use. I mean, it's one of the best things about self-storage is how good of a neighbor they can be. But if I go in and get the zoning associated with that, so let's take Phoenix, for example, I can do it in C2 with a special permit, or I can do it in C3, or I can do it in some of the Commerce Park or industrial zones, but those all have other uses that come with them that we'd say, yeah, maybe that's not a good use next to neighbor storage. Yeah, these other ones, no. So by coming in and saying, but here's how we solve that problem. We will do a PUD or a P80 and it'll just have one use in it. That's it. And so the neighbors will have utter confidence of what can be allowed. And it won't be a scenario of, well, we don't mind this use, but what if you guys go away? What guarantee we have that it wouldn't be some other use, right? And I have to honestly say, well, the site plan stipulation can get you a lot of the way there because, if I stipulate to a building that looks like a storage building, really couldn't be a gas station. They don't look like that, right? They have different layouts. They have different, canopy with the building, right? But still being able to say if there's only one use allowed, right? Some ancillary uses, but only one primary use. And so I think in that environment, it simply made sense to solve the zoning issue, the zoning concern on that site. And it was a little unique, right? And it was, but it was something I think we looked at and the director said, in this environment, this situation, that kind of makes some sense, right? And so it was a little bit extra work for the applicant to go through that. So you got to draft the draft as opposed to just selecting a box. This is the zoning district we want. You have to do more work, but it also, in theory, helps to facilitate the back end where you're not having to defend a list of uses that you don't even care about. I don't want those 40 uses. So why do I have to go to bat for those? I don't have to carry that baggage. I can just say, this is the only use I want. This is the one I can speak to. This is one I can confidently tell you won't harm you, for example. Now, this is really the question that is from the beginning of looking at a property, from the beginning of trying to make a deal. You're asking the question, should I proceed? Or the client's asking the question, should I proceed? And they're weighing the pros and the cons. They're weighing the risks and how long is the entitlement process? How long is it going to cost us to take this off market? Is it worth it? Right. So you're always sort of asking those questions as you go through. And so meeting with consultants is going to be a big part of that. And again, as I mentioned, that you need land use consultants needs to be part of that, but it's not the only consultant that you need to meet with, right? And so as you're putting the deal together, you may have quick phone calls. You call an architect. Hey, I'm just looking at this deal. Would that pencil? What kind of building we get on this site? What do you think? Right? And then that architect would look at it, I think, like we look at it, which is, look, I'm taking a free phone call from a broker, right? I'm not charging you for a 20-minute call, but I would assume I'm going to be on the short list of attorneys that you recommend, right? I may not get the deal. That's not your call as a broker. It's the client's call, right? But maybe I get a look, right? And so that's worth it to me, right? I'd rather spend 20 minutes talking to you about a potential deal than 20 minutes at maybe some function where I'm putting out, it's my sort of goodwill outreach time, right?
You have a great point. I talked to a lot of brokers. I've not talked to them about, hey, what kind of land use relationships do you have? Do you have a lot of brokers that are working to build relationships with you right now? And if so, how is that going for everybody? And if not, why not? Because it seems like a no-brainer to me. Like if I'm a broker, I should be talking to you all the time.
Yeah, it's a great, and frankly, I think that the desire for that relationship flows both directions, right? Because we see the broker community as a tremendous resource for us to get in on good deals, and we want good projects. We want to be involved in good projects. And so, yeah, so I've got brokers who know me and they know that I'll get back to them, and they'll, hey, Taylor, just want to pick your brain on something. They'll give me a call. I try to get back to them. And so, I was just talking to a broker the other day and said, hey, you probably, been doing it a long time. I said, you probably got your people, you probably got your zoning attorneys, your go-tos. I said, hey, put me on that list. I'd love to be a part of it. right? And so I'm looking for that relationship, but I
Yeah.
think, yeah, brokers should be thinking, boy, who do I have? Who's on my, as they used to say, on my friend list on your top five or whatever for cell phones, right? Who's on your short list that you can call? But what I would also say is that, yeah, it's architects, it's engineers, it's hydrologists, it's the people that, like, if you're doing work in a jurisdiction in Arizona that may have some water challenges, who's your water consultant, right?
Well, and if I'm a broker, I just feel like, wow, what an incredible opportunity to add a ton of value to my clients by saying, hey, I've got this land use person, like you said, I've got this architect team. I mean, I can kind of be the go-to person for everybody. And the amount of time and knowledge I can save my clients by talking to somebody like you about, hey, can we put a PUD here or not? And you go, Chris, absolutely not. Okay, this one's off the list, right? I mean, I just thank you for sharing that. But the more I'm talking, I'm like, okay, this is a no-brainer. I need to talk to more brokers that are talking to you. So Kristen asks, will this video be available to view after this live is over? Yes, Kristen, thank you. Any other questions that people have, please let us know. We'd love to have Taylor answer those for you, getting specific about zoning and/or entitlements. And Taylor, apologize, but I just think it's really important, since we're speaking specifically to brokers, to help them, if they're not already doing this, give them maybe some ideas of what they can do to reach out to you or people in your position to be that much better of an asset for their clients.
Yep. And like I said, I mean, hopefully consultants understand the value of that conversation from their side too, right? We all need to run businesses, right? If we give away our time free, we wouldn't be able to stay in business. But using that time wisely, right? I see it as incredible use of my time to help the broker community get a deal put together. Because if that deal gets put together, or frankly, sometimes to help them kill the deal so they can move on to a deal that's more valuable. Right? And I'm going to give them candid advice, because that's my stock and trade, is to give you candid, clear, insights. And I'm going to tell you, hey, that's a great question. We'd have to look into that. That's not something I can answer off the top of my head, because that's going to require a records request and a little bit more analysis. But here's some things to think about.
And the thing I love most about this conversation right now is that if I'm working with you and building this relationship, and then you and I do a deal together, everybody's making money, right?
Yep.
When I go to the city, they nothing against city people, but there's no incentive for them to give me really great information or to do a bunch of homework on a site, because it's like, whether we do the deal or not, they get paid. And so I just think this is really important for brokers to appreciate what it's like to have people like you on the team. And I know many of them do. And to be able to go to you and go, hey, let's save some time here, because time is money. Give me the probability of getting this particular project built in this area. And if you can tell me no sooner than someone at the city, then everybody wins.
Yep. That's exactly right. Yep. The other part of that process of vetting is meeting with key decision makers and city staff. So I included Phoenix here, right? Obviously, this is true of every jurisdiction. So these would be, your city council members, the current 9 sitting city council members in Phoenix. And then these are other key members of the sort of development process, if you will. And so, from left to right, you have Alan Stevenson, who is one of the deputy city managers. He was previously the planning director. And so he's in one of his departments is to be over planning, right? So if you're at a high level conversation, he might be a person to reach out to. Chris Mackey is a director of economic development. So if you're bringing in something that's going to have lots of jobs or lots of, economic impact, she's a great person to talk to. Josh Bednarik is the current planning director, and right. So if you're able to meet with him, get some high level thoughts on something, you may be able to get some feedback. Jason Blakely is the one who you would be sort of the head of your site planning efforts, your permit process. So if you say, hey, this has got entitlements, but it's got some strange things on this side, we need to kind of understand. And then Trisha Gomes is on the zoning side, kind of Jason's counterpart on the zoning side. So again, every jurisdiction's got their own organizational structure. The valuable thing here is to be thinking about, hey, there may be some people that we need to meet with. And this is part of what we do, which is, I can give you my thoughts on a property, but at the end of the day, I may love your case. I may think it's fantastic, but I'm not going to make the decision. So what matters to you is, what do the decision makers ultimately think? So I'm a good first check, because if I think it stinks, you may go, boy, man, Taylor didn't think this is very good. Maybe we should rethink this, right? If I go, hey, I think this is fantastic, but you should be aware of this, meeting with these decision makers early on, and these council members can say, hey, I don't think this is going to work. We've worked on this project before. The last time somebody came in, it was really challenging. These neighbors are just really don't want this. I don't think I can support this. And they may say, hey, I think this is good, right? So they're not committing themselves to you by any means, but they're giving you their thoughts. It's their district, for example, if it's a district system like Phoenix is. And then with key staff members, you're similar. So that's one of the things we do is we go and work with these decision makers up front to try to get some important data points so that we're, again, helping the client decide, is it worth moving forward, right?
You and I both know business is all about relationships. And again, I just share with brokers, having a relationship with someone like you, Taylor, now you've got, I'm assuming, much stronger relationships than most brokers would with some of these city leaders. So again, you get to leverage that as well. So thank you.
Yep. Exactly. And look, these are some of the jurisdictions in Arizona. And of course, there's a lot. They all operate in some ways a little different, and where they have their different organizational structure, different elected officials. They run their councils are somewhat different. And so, everything, they have different focuses. They have different things that they really like. And so you kind of have to know the jurisdiction and know, hey, you're coming into this jurisdiction, you're making this request. You just need to be aware that that's not a preferred land use, or they're going to struggle letting go of employment zones to do a self-storage case, right? Nobody's claiming self-storage as a high employment generator, right? It supports other uses that are, but you have to kind of know a jurisdiction's sort of predilections, and you have to kind of know where they want to see stuff. In fact, I was speaking with a council member the other day and just said, tell me what you want to see in your district. What are you interested in? I said, because his clients come to me, and if I can say, look, this district, this council member really wants to see this type of thing, or this council member really would prefer that this is not, we don't get more of this. That helps me give my client data points, And so I like that question for elected officials, because sometimes they'll say, hey, boy, if you could bring me a user for this site, that would be great. We're trying to get this thing redeveloped. And then being able to go to a client or go to a broker and say, hey, they're interested in this site. You're not rolling thing. That's a much lower risk when the council member is saying, I'd really like to get blank on this type of use on this property.
Thank you for saying that. And when you can begin to reverse engineer what the city's looking for and then find those products to put in those places, it just makes everybody's life so much easier. So that was fantastic. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah. Now, neighborhood outreach, this is so important, and it's only gotten more important as time has gone on, as the ability for neighbors to easily connect with one another, whether it's through Nextdoor, Facebook, email, whatever the case may be. Neighborhood outreach is really important. And as you look at a site, the thing you should be asking yourself is, what's the neighborhood reaction going to be? And your ability to predict that will of course, increase as you do more deals, and of course that's what we do well, is we issue spot with neighbors, but it's really important, and we do some of that. We'll do both of it, both in-house, and then also if there's more extensive outreach, we will often recommend an outreach firm that can go knock doors, and it's going to be a little bit more economical from perspective of paying your attorney to go knock 100 doors, right? So it can be a little more cost savings, but also they can specialize in that. And so they just have they have a depth of experience in neighborhood outreach, knocking doors, talking to people, getting their feedback. So an outreach consultant can be valuable as well.
Are they doing like online marketing too? Like, hey, here's, like little billboards on different sites and stuff, and really localize it?
Yeah. So it kind of depends, right? So, you may have, often will set up a website so that people can be funneled to a website. So rather than on Nextdoor, it only being as accurate as the person who authored it, hopefully if I've got a website, somebody in that chain can say, hey, either that's not quite accurate, or hey, here's the website of the developer so that you can get the information that you need to get, and they can get on there. So sometimes that type of online presence can be really valuable. And then frankly, we're still humans, and humans like to have human interaction. So getting out into the community, particularly if let's say there's 5 neighbors that are up against the property, well, you may still have 100 that are interested. but those 5 are going to be most impacted. And so sometimes it may be the case where we'll go and I'll go, or my planner will go and talk to those 5 neighbors on their doorstep and say, hey, we want to reach out to you early and respect the fact that you're adjacent to this site. And neighbors, generally speaking, will have a much better reaction to you if you are with them early. If the first interaction they've had with the project is a letter saying you're going to hearing, or even that you're holding some neighborhood meeting, sometimes that's even too late. So, again, humans, neighbors, we're all humans. We want to be shown respect. We want to feel like someone's listening to us. And I think that can go a long way to building trust with a neighbor, is that you show, no, we do respect you. We respect that you live next door. We're not the big bag developer coming to shove whatever we want down your throat. We're here to talk to you. Now, there may be some things we can't agree on, right? You want us to lower it to a certain height. I can't get there, but I might be able to do some other things that help mitigate the impact. And so we try to have those conversations early and understand the community impact, because as it gets to hearing, the neighborhood opposition can be one of the single most difficult things to overcome as you go to hearing. And so we want to have those conversations early, because there again, it's that early warning sign. Hey, if we need to pull the plug on this, let's find out early before we go too deep into it, only to find out that there's a massive uprising and we just don't have any community support, right?
So are you going in the community and, hey, for example, we want to build, and we try and do this. We want to build a self-storage site here, and you talk to some of the neighbors and go, what would you want to see? And almost enroll them into helping you build it and create it to a certain extent. Have you done something like that before? Or?
Well, so what we've done before is go out into a community and say, look, here's the intended use, but we haven't designed it yet.
Got it.
Before we put pen to paper, and maybe I've got some loose ideas, maybe the client's got some general layout, but we say, look, we haven't done a site plan. We haven't done elevations, because we want to talk to you first. And that's again a big sign of respect, that you're not late to the ball game, right? You're not coming in at the last minute. We are bringing you in right at the beginning. And sometimes I'll say to neighbors, now you may ask me questions about the design, and the flip side of me bringing you in early is I may not have all the answers for you yet, because I haven't been on this plan for 3 months. So that's the flip side. I'm bringing you in early. You're going to get more design input, but I may not have answers for you. So if you'll sort of give me some grace on that side, we can sort of build this from the beginning, and hopefully, out of the gate, hey, it's a deal killer. Like this aspect, if it's within 30 feet of my property, like I'm going to go crazy. Oh, okay. Do you mind if it adds extra height? Like if it's beyond 50 feet, I don't care if it's 2 stories. Oh, okay. Well, that's valuable to know, right? Rather than try to design a product that's 2 stories up against your property, maybe we could shuffle things. And again, it isn't to say that the neighbors dictate your site plan, but they can certainly help guide things. And if you can say, look, that's okay, we could do that. Let's do that. That's going to make things a lot easier. But again, it's about getting those data points. As a broker, you want to be guiding the client to say, hey, outreach up front. I'm seeing these neighbors next door. Boy, that's going to be valuable to do. So again, a lot of this outreach is not something the broker's going to do, but I think you want to be planting the seeds with the client early on to get that outreach, to get the intel from the neighbors early. And sometimes that can come through the council member. They can say, hey, just so you know, I know the neighborhood leader over here. Let me give you that phone number. And you can reach right out to the neighborhood leader. And we've had that. And that's valuable, right? Because then you're trying to figure out who's the voice. Is it just anybody? Or they go, no, there's really kind of one person who generally kind of speaks for the community, and most people really fall behind him. And if you can get that number out of the gate, that can be valuable too. Okay, so here's sort of the general zoning process. Just again, whatever broker should know about zoning, just to sort of be generally aware of this process. But you have a pre-application sort of process you see here in the blue, right? So a pre-application meeting is generally the city's way and your way of figuring out, well, here's what we want to do. And they say, okay, if you want to do that, here's the zoning vehicle you need to use. Before you just go and prep this extensive application only to find out as soon as you file that you kind of missed the mark. They do a pre-application meeting, which in some jurisdictions is just about zoning. And in some jurisdictions, it's site planning and zoning packaged into one pre-app meeting. Sometimes they're separate, but the whole notion is let's talk through some things before you go and spend a lot of money on site plans and engineering fees and architectural fees. But then you submit, let's follow the blue column here. You submit the application, you go through a staff review, and then the red is going to be some series of posting and publishing. So you're giving public notice and how that occurs, where it occurs. Often there's a neighborhood meeting requirement, 1 or 2. That'll happen in sort of that red process. Some places want you to do a lot of staff work before you get to the neighborhood meeting. And some want you to do the neighborhood meeting right out of the gate. The theories under that are, hey, before we staff know what we're going to ask you to do, we'd like to know what the community has to say. So go do that first. The other side of that is, before you go to the community and show a site plan that we weren't even going to be, we wouldn't be okay with, let us shape you a little bit, so that when you go to the community, you have a plan that at least passes a minimal muster with us, or maybe it's gone through a lot of refinement, rather than show some plan that's really off base. So there's really justifications for either approach. And then as you get over to the green boxes, you're generally going to some type of planning and zoning commission, or they may call it slightly different things, but generally planning commission. And then you're going to the city council. In some jurisdictions, you'll have to go twice. We have a sort of first reading of the hearing, or a second, and you go to it again. Most of the time, it's just going to be one public hearing, but things can get continued. So as you're going into deals, as you're thinking about escrow timelines, one thing to be very thoughtful about is, how long will it take to get through this jurisdiction zoning process without opposition and without continuances? And then ask the question again, with continuances, with opposition, with delays with staff, and make sure that you're negotiating sufficient amounts of time, right? Because that's really important. You don't want to get caught at the end. Now, generally speaking, I would say that if you're really close to the end and you're at council, and boy, my due diligence timeline, or whatever timeline's coming up is really close, but you've gone this far, often sellers will say, hey, I don't want to start over, right? I'd rather give you another 60 days than go back to the beginning of the market and have somebody else come in and try zoning. So often you can get extra time, but there's no guarantee. Mm-hmm. And if the market has changed and now it's not as good a deal for the seller, they may be saying, I'm not so sad if this deal goes away, because I go back to market at a much higher land value. So just be thoughtful about making sure you have sufficient time. Nobody can predict everything, but you want to give yourself, as a buying broker, you want to give as much time as possible. Of course, on the selling side, it might be the opposite, where you're trying to hold their feet to the fire, make sure they stay on task, and make sure they get through the process. All right, stipulations. I put in the sort of sausage here, because in some ways, stipulations on a zoning case is where the sausage is made. And that's both good and bad, right? It doesn't mean necessarily behind the scenes in a smoky room. When I work with a neighbor, that's how I'm able to tell them, hey, don't just take my word for it. I'm going to bake it into the zoning stipulations, so that you have comfort. Frankly, when I walk away, I want my client, or if they walk away and it stays on the land, I want the next guy to make sure he does what we said to you we would do. So stipulations are my friend when I work with neighbors, because I can tell them that's going to be a 30-foot setback, and I'm going to bake it into the zoning. And if anybody wants to do something less, they're going to have to come back. They're going to have to renotice it, and they're going to have to go back to hearing to make that modification. But that's how you're able to work with staff and really fine tune it. So it's kind of where the sausage is made, because saying I want C1 zoning and then having C1 zoning, that's just not how it works anymore. These stipulations allow us to really fine tune the project to make sure that it meets your needs, jurisdictional needs, neighbor needs, for example.
I want to back up for 1 second, so if you don't mind, just go back to the escrow piece, because we're going through that right now. We're trying to get some extensions and whatnot. Do you have any coaching for brokers? I guess it's going to depend on experience and relationships, but any coaching on brokers and how to make both sides? Because like you said, all he's trying to do is close the deal. So get both sides to sort of see the perspectives of each and give a fair timeline.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about it sort of up front, what I think is valuable for both sides is to ask an expert. Both ask a zoning attorney, right? If it's a zoning process, and if it's we have zoning, but we need to go through and get site plan, and then we need to get permits, and then we need to, we don't want to close until I have a permit in hand. All right, well, talk to a good architect that knows that jurisdiction, who can say, we're seeing these take about X months, right? And I think both sides need to have that. in their corner. They need to have somebody they trust in their corner advising them on timelines. And maybe you get a couple opinions, right? What are you seeing? What do you think this would take? I think it'd take about 8 months to get through that process. Ask another architect, 6 to 8 months. Okay, maybe that 8 was a little high, and maybe you can go a little less. So I think both sides getting in, the information right, and then it's being creative sometimes about a little bit of earnest money, right? Hey, if I get down this road and we get to this point, and I'm feeling pretty good, yeah, I don't mind putting up some earnest money, because at that point I better probably be pretty close to permits. So yeah, we'll compensate you for time off market, but if it's going to go towards the purchase price, then at that point maybe I'm okay letting 30K go in earnest money, because I'm feeling real good, like we're going to close on this most likely, but not having it be the close, because then I'm fully with the site. Let me still have it be an escrow. So I think there's some creativity. I think it's getting the data points. And then of course with the shifting market, that's the X factor, right?
Yeah.
And that can sometimes kind of cut both ways, where the seller's thinking, I don't know, in a year from now, I don't know what's going to happen with the market, and I want to be flexible, and I want to be able to pull out and move on. And so that is one of the challenges. But I think creativity, time, and sometimes we've been, when asking for extensions, sometimes a client has asked us, hey, can you send us a letter that says what you foresee the remaining timeline being, right? And then they'll share that with the seller and say, this is from our counsel, this is what they're seeing. Or they'll maybe could even put me on a call with them. Hey, we just wanted to get us all on a call. This is, it's a good working relationship. We just wanted you to be able to ask questions of our attorney, so that we're not just blowing smoke in your face, asking for more time. Because then I can get on and say, let me tell you what we've been through, the work that we have done. Because they can see like, wow, you guys have been busy. I didn't realize all that went into what it took for you guys to even get to the planning commission. Once they see, yeah, these guys aren't playing with me. These guys have not spent 8 months spinning wheels and locking up my property with no effort. These guys have really put time in.
You bring up a good point, I think, because one of the things that we, I think, do a pretty good job of is we try to frame the relationship as, hey, look, now we're partners. Like, now that we've got this thing under contract, we're partners, and let's work together, because you want our money and we want your dirt. And sometimes I think some sellers are more apt to see it through that, perspective, if you will, than others. But any thoughts or comments on that? Because we find if we do that successfully, it's a much smoother process.
Yeah, I mean, that's ideal. I heard it once in a book that all things being equal, people prefer to negotiate with friends, and all things being unequal, people still prefer to negotiate with friends. It was something along those lines, and it's really stuck with me that we all prefer to do deals with people that we trust and respect. And even if we represent different interests, that if there's a level of trust and respect there, we can get deals done, right? And I think the opposite is true. When you have a deal with somebody that you don't get along with, that you don't necessarily trust, it just makes it harder, and it can be harder on little things. And so one of the reasons I even got into this area of law is that this area of law tends to be more about getting things accomplished together, and hopefully we do it with some degree of mutual respect, even with community groups that may not want something, but we try to blend and get it done, as opposed to just an adversarial fight, right? And so as you get into a deal, hopefully you're building that relationship with the seller, with the buyer up front, and either the brokers are having the communication or whoever's having that communication. So, and you're earning that trust, so that when moments come and you're saying, hey, we really need 2 more months. We've been working really hard on this. We're very close. We feel really comfortable with where we're headed. They can feel comfortable knowing these guys have shot me straight from the beginning. And frankly, it doesn't hurt to have a seller want to pull for you, right? At the end of the day, they need to sell their property, and there's economic interest, but it doesn't hurt when a seller's saying, man, all things being equal, I just want to see Chris be successful. Good guy, working his tail off. And I'd like to see my property go to a good use. And man, this thing's well designed, and I like it, right? There's at the end of the day, people are humans, and people want to see good uses, especially if it's a family that's selling their farm or selling some historic property they've had from the family for 50 years. They're generally, I would say, there's a piece of them, maybe it's a big piece of them, that's saying, I don't just want something. I want something nice. I want to be able to look at this property and feel proud of what got put on it. So I think that's all, part of it. Again, it's sort of entering into that partnership where you can feel like, hey, we're gonna do this together, and we're gonna get something. And of course, every seller's different, every buyer's different, and sometimes that you're not going to get that level of connection, but you do the best you can, I think. All right. let's move forward a little bit. So some of the stipulations that may come in, I sort of alluded to a lot of these, site plan, your elevations, they may dictate the design of the elevations, the height of the elevations, your density, your circulation, landscaping, offsite improvements, timeline. So these are the types of things that can come up. And again, as sort of the development team, of which brokers are often right there. Sometimes brokers they put in the deal and they kind of step back, and sometimes brokers are a little bit more involved. But in any event, thinking about these from a broker standpoint is, what are some stipulations we can put in place to either get the council to be supportive, neighbors to be supportive, but then also you have to be thoughtful too, that you want to avoid stipulations that are going to hamstring you. So that's the developer's side too, right? So we aren't just rolling over and giving up all these stipulations. Sometimes you're saying, okay, I hear what you're saying. You want to have some degree of detail on the site plan and lock it in, but this is what the site plan we have, but what if it needs to change? And I don't want to come back to council for that. So we need flexibility, but I hear what you're saying. What I can do, we can lock in let's say it's 100-foot setback from the northern property line. I won't put a building up there. I can guarantee you that that's where we'll have our circulation. So that's going to free up buildings. But if you can give me more flexibility on the south, that makes sure that if we have to tweak, if we have to modify through engineering, or if I bring in a different user at the end, right, then I have flexibility. And so as a practitioner and as a development team, you want flexibility where you can get it where it's appropriate, but you have to also think about what's the interest of the other side, either the municipality, the council, the neighbors, and see if there's ways that you can bake in protections in ways that provide you maximum flexibility, right? So things to think about. All right, Nolan and Dolan limits. So this is when we talk about stipulations, something to be sort of just generally aware of, is that municipalities cannot just ask and demand whatever they want, right? That has no connection to your development. So an example might be, oh, okay, well, you're bringing in an industrial project. Yeah, we're happy to support that as long as you build us a new park and a new library. And you're thinking, wait, what? That doesn't have, well, I mean, there's a nexus there. As you bring in people, they're going to bring in families, and they're going to need to have this, and they're going to have that. Now, there may be impact fees where some of that gets sort of covered, right? But a stipulation like that, you might say, I'm not sure that has a nexus, right? An essential nexus between one and the other, right? Or it may say, we're bringing in this little mom and pop. It's going to be an 1,800 square foot tiny little building, and it'll be this tiny little baby zoning case. And they go, great, we could really use a bridge. So if you could build that $5 million bridge, and you're going, man, that doesn't seem roughly proportional with what I'm asking for, right? And so there's constitutional limits, and Nolan and Dolan are two different Supreme Court cases. But generally, without diving into the details, just be aware that there is latitude. Jurisdictions have latitude to ask for stipulations, but there is a limit at which a jurisdiction cannot just demand that you give up this crazy amount or something that's unrelated. So essential nexus, rough proportionality, and the phrase rough proportionality tells you that the courts are not looking to dive in there and split hairs. They're going to give some discretion to the jurisdiction, but to a certain limit. All right, so site plan approval process. Again, we're trying to give sort of an overview of different processes. So be aware that as you're coming in, let's say your deal already has zoning. Hey, congratulations, you've got zoning, but you've got to get your site plan, or it needs zoning, but then it's going to go through the site plan. So just being aware of the site plan process, just generally speaking, is the more technical portion. So it may be that I stipulate to a site plan in the zoning case. That doesn't mean that I've had the level of detail on it that maybe it's going to ultimately need to have, where I'm measuring everything out. I'm making sure all the turning radii work for the fire trucks. I'm doing all of that sort of hyper specific. I may have a sort of generic landscape plan. We'll have trees here and some plants, but I haven't paid a landscape architect to tell me what tree, at what size, at what spacing. And so this as I go through my site plan process, I'm getting into more specifics. And then as I go into building permits, I'm getting more specific even still. Some jurisdictions, just be aware, have a design review process. So this is often separate from the zoning entitlement section. So I may have to go through in some places it's an administrative review, and in some places it's a public hearing where you have a design review body, and they're going in and specifically looking at not the zoning, but they're looking at specifically the design of something. So they're going to be maybe a little bit more, they're going to be a higher level of scrutiny on your design in order to get it through that sort of public hearing process. And then I'm going to pause there, Chris, because I think we're coming on an hour, and there's a whole other section on variances that, variances are what they sound like. You vary from the code and what that sort of process looks like. But these are things to think about, again, as a broker, just being aware of what are the things that need to happen before a client's going to feel comfortable closing. And if they're discretionary, their public hearing processes, a lot of times clients are saying, boy, I'm not comfortable closing. If I can't get zoning, this is a piece of dirt that I can't use. So they'll want to kick their escrow timelines. And so you just need to be aware of all the stuff and all of the risks and be conversant in that language so you can understand kind of the level of risk and guide the client on whether it's a deal or a deal worth pursuing or not.
Taylor, thank you for that. If you want to get a hold of Taylor, you can go to earlcurley.com or email him, tearl@earlcurley.com as well. Thanks for the time. It sounds like you've got some more here, so maybe we can have you back in the near future, and just want to give you 60 seconds for a last word.
Yeah. So I would say that, first of all, thank you for having me. And I think there are a lot of great deals out there. I know the market's kind of in an odd place right now, and it may be a little harder to put the deal together, but there are good deals to be had. But I think that fortune will favor the prepared and the knowledgeable. And so it's knowing, where do you want to spend your time? So being able to quickly vet deals, get the information that you need, and then understand the information as it's coming in so you can advise the client, good deal to pursue, not a good deal to pursue, is going to be in your best interest. And so make sure you've got good people in your corner, whether that's fellow brokers, zoning counsel, attorneys over other fields, engineers, architects, people that you've built relationships of trust with, and that can help you vet those deals and make sure you're pursuing the right ones.
Taylor, great stuff. Again, appreciate it. This is the Commercial Real Estate Report. Please share this with your friends and colleagues, and we'll have much more with Taylor in the future. Thank you.